Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel, A Little Bit of Everything, where I talk about a little bit of everything. In this video, we will get into season 4 of the OC. Finally, without further ado, let's get into it. It's been 5 months since Marissa died, and everything is a mess. Summer went to Brown and has been focusing on climate activism with this guy named Shay that she met there as a way to cope and has been ignoring Seth. Julie became addicted to pills and doing work around the house as a way to cope. Seth is working in the comic book store as a way to distract himself since he's alone in Newport. Sandy is working as a public defender. Taylor is in Paris studying, and Ryan has moved out of the Coens' house and is now living in the back of the bar that he works at. Kirsten goes to the comic store to give Seth things for him to give to Ryan and tells him to invite him over for dinner. He goes to do so, and Ryan agrees but ends up not showing up and instead ends up taking part in an illegal cage fight. Seth goes there looking for him and finds him fighting. He doesn't tell his parents what he saw, but he says enough to get them to worry, so Sandy decides to go see Ryan. Kirsten, meanwhile, goes to visit Julie right when she gets a secretive phone call and tells Kirsten that she's busy and can't talk. That night, she calls Ryan and asks him to meet her at the motel. It turns out that she hired a private investigator to find Volchok, and she has the information now, but she won't give it to the police. Instead, we'll give it to Ryan, who tells her that he doesn't care anymore. Caitlin is hanging out with Luke's twin brothers when she sees Neil with his ex-wife, so she starts to blackmail him into buying her things in order to not tell her mom. Taylor calls Summer and lets her believe that she's in Paris, but she's actually in Newport. Summer, on the other hand, decides to go to Newport after Seth sends her a voicemail telling her that he's worried about Ryan. Summer doesn't want to go home, so she calls her dad and they meet up for dinner when she comes across Taylor and her mom, who doesn't know that she's in Newport yet. The next morning, Summer goes to visit Ryan at the bar and asks him to go with her to the comic book store, where they basically stage an interrogation. Sandy then takes him to the bar and Ryan ends up packing up and going back home. Seth takes Summer to her house and she enters her room for the first time since going back and has a vision of Marissa in her room. So she ends up going back to Brown. At the end of the episode, Ryan visits Marissa's thumb for the first time and asks Julie for Volchok's information. Ryan talks with Julie before he leaves to try and find Volchok, and Seth hears him on the phone, so he convinces him to take him with him. Seth leaves Sandy and Kirsten an anagram and then calls them, letting them know what's happening, so Ryan ends up throwing away his phone and they go looking for Volchok. They go to stay at a motel and Ryan goes to the bar that Volchok is supposedly working at without Seth. He asks for him, but they tell him that they don't know where he's at because he's been fired. Seth goes to a different bar to look for Ryan and he comes across these dudes who force him to drink with them and get a tattoo. At Brown, Summer arrives and finds Taylor in her bed. There, Taylor finds out about the relationship between Summer and Shay, so she gets worried that she's cheating on Seth. So she goes and tells Summer that she needs to call him, but he obviously doesn't answer. The next night, Taylor decides to go home, tells Summer that she needs to talk to Seth, and that while in France, she got married and is now in the middle of a divorce. So the next day, Summer goes to the airport to see her, and they talk a little bit before she goes home. Julie is called by the school's dean of discipline, who tells her that Caitlin is wasting her potential and tells her that she wants them both to work on a school clothing drive together. There, they come across Kirsten, who tells Julie about the boys going to Mexico, and Julie basically incriminates herself, and Ryan calls her and tells her about Volchok not being there. Back home, Sandy and Kirsten decide to go to Mexico to find the boys. Meanwhile, the previous night, Seth had gone to the bar that Volchok was supposed to be working at, and one of the bartenders tells him where he really is at, so he tells Ryan the next morning. Ryan goes looking for him, but he ends up going to the wrong door because Seth gave him the wrong address, and Seth is the one that shows up to see Volchok and tells him to let Sandy help him, but he ends up running away. After this, Seth, Kirsten, and Sandy go to find Ryan and tell him that Volchok is gone. Back in Newport, Caitlin tells Julie that she still has a living daughter, so Julie ends up showing up to the school clothing drive where she finds out that Caitlin has been stealing and selling the clothes. When they go back home, they argue and Caitlin tells Julie about Neil's cheating. At the end, Sandy meets up with Julie and confronts her about sending Ryan to commit a murder. Someone tries to write Seth a letter telling him about her feelings but is unable to do so, and spends the night with Chase sleeping under a tree. The Coenses go back home and Ryan is mad at them. A few days later, Ryan is still mad at Seth, but Kirsten tells them that they have to fix things and that they are going to come together as a family for Thanksgiving. Sandy gets a phone call from Volchok, who is back in Newport. He wants him to be his lawyer, and Sandy agrees. Taylor is staying in Seth's room because she doesn't want to see her mom, and she tells him that his relationship with Summer is probably hanging by a thread, which is fitting since Summer is still ignoring him and is thinking about not going back home, but her dad ends up convincing her to go. Caitlin is still blackmailing Neil and gets a dog without anyone's permission. Julie Julie is having her private investigator find Volchok, and she agrees to talk with Neil after the holidays. Julie and the boys come across each other at the supermarket, and she tells Ryan that she's close to finding Volchok and will call him when she has the information. At the Cohen's house, Taylor tells Kirsten about everything that's going on and convinces her to be the one who tells her mom because she's too afraid to do it. They go and tell her, and she's of course mad and tells Taylor that she's no longer welcome in her house, so she ends up staying at the Cohen's house. Seth goes to pick up Summer at the airport, and they go to his house where she sees a poster of Atomic Comic, and she gets upset after seeing Marissa's character, so she ends up leaving. They go to the soup kitchen, but they had enough volunteers, so they end up taking a bunch of homeless people to have Thanksgiving dinner with them. Summer ends up having a mini breakdown when Seth tries to talk to her about Marissa and ends up going home at the same time. The back home, Julie is also having a breakdown because she found out that Volchok is in custody. At Sandy's office, he tells Volchok that he's going to meet with the DA and that they will hand out his guilty plea so that he can be sentenced. While they are leaving, Ryan arrives and sees them together, so he ends up going to visit Julie, but Neil doesn't let him talk to her. Sandy goes home and tells Kirsten about what's going on. Ryan confronts them and goes looking for Volchok at the beach. There he talks with Heather, who tells him that he hasn't called her and she doesn't know anything. Sandy finally catches up to him and takes him to the motel where Volchok is staying at. He goes in, they fight a little bit, and the police shows up to arrest Volchok. At the end of the night, everybody goes back to the Cohen's house and they have dinner together. Summer goes back to Brown without saying goodbye again. Julie and Neil break up. Julie apologizes to Sandy and has dinner with them, and she and Ryan talk about the first time that he saw Marissa. A few days later, Summer starts to go to therapy to try and deal with Marissa's death for once and for all. Seth is freaking out because he thinks that Summer is going to break up with him, but when he sees her at the airport, she's back to being like she was before Marissa died, and she apologizes to him for her previous behavior. Shay then shows up to invite her to some protest, and she tells him about who she was before going to college and tells him that she wishes they can still be friends, and he says that it's fine. Despite this, Summer realizes that she doesn't really like the Valley anymore or celeb gossip, and that she still wants to do activism. She tries to suppress this by going shopping with Seth, but it doesn't work, so she ends up calling Shay, going back to the activism, and Seth supports her but ends up going home. Taylor is staying with Julie and gets some papers from her husband. She goes looking for Seth but comes across Ryan and asks him to do her a favor of being present when her husband visits her so that she doesn't cave to him, and he agrees. The day they're supposed to meet, instead of her husband, his lawyer shows up and tells her that her husband doesn't want a divorce, that he wants her to go back to friends, and that the only way for the divorce to happen is if either of them had an affair. So she lies and tells him that Ryan is her lover. That night, Taylor shows up and gives Ryan a contract that she needs him to sign that is supposedly for him to attest to her character, but after he reads it, he realized that it's him attesting to the affair, so he doesn't sign it. But after she tells him that she married her husband because she was lonely and that she's going to have to go back to friends to fix things with him, he ends up showing up to the second meeting between Taylor and the lawyer and kisses her, and she ends up falling in love with him. Julie tells Caitlin that Neil has allowed them to stay in the house until they want to, and they make a deal that Julie won't date any men and that Caitlin will stay out of trouble. Julie and Kirsten go out together, and they come across this neighbor of theirs who tells Julie that she's been seeing younger guys and that she should go out with them that night. In Harbor, Luke's brothers tell Caitlin that they found someone to get them fake IDs, and she agrees to go with them to the club. At the end, they all end up going to the same club, and Caitlin sees her mom kissing some guy, but they end up going home and eating ice cream together. A few days later, Taylor is in full seduce mode, and she asks Seth for help to try and find out if he's ready to date again, but Seth tells her not to mess with him because he hasn't been able to sleep in a while, so Taylor decides to become his sleep therapist, and they end up spending a lot of time together. Nothing she does actually works, and Ryan ends up telling her that he needs to work through this whole thing alone. Taylor then asks Caitlin for advice, trying to get Ryan's attention, and that night she shows up to a party that they're hosting looking very beautiful, and Seth tells Ryan that he should give her a chance. But Ryan ends up telling her that he likes her as a friend, and she goes home. She tries to quit this whole thing of seducing him, but Seth convinces her to try again, and she tells Ryan that if after she kisses him he still doesn't feel anything, she will leave him alone. They kiss, she goes home, and he sleeps for the first time. At Brown, Summer and Shay are planning to steal some rabbits from the science lab because they think that they are being hurt during the animal testing, but they of course get caught and are brought in for questioning. Summer admits to doing it, but she doesn't give Shay up. However, he blames her entirely. On the adult side, Julie is still sleeping with younger men and doing so in the house, so obviously Caitlin knows. Caitlin is trying to get with her tennis instructor, but he doesn't pay her attention because she's 15 and he ends up sleeping with Julie instead. Kirsten and Julie are planning to buy another dating site so that they could have a bigger clientele, but the person who was selling got a better offer that they can meet. So Sandy convinces this oil tycoon, Gordon Bullitt, of investing in their company in exchange for a date with Julie. During the party, Caitlin shows up with her instructor, who is named Spencer, and it turns out that he is Bullitt's son, so Bullitt is off the deal. Caitlin and Julie have a conversation about the latter's recent behavior, and she apologizes to Caitlin and ends their relationship with Spencer. So Caitlin goes and convinces Bullet of investing in their business. A few days later, Seth goes to visit Summer, but she has gotten suspended and is of course supposed to go back home. She calls him and tells him that when she's already in Newport and he's in Brown, so he decides to avenge her and go against Che, but he apparently saw him coming and left a CD for him, telling him that he's hiding until he leaves. Turns out Che is actually at Summers' house to apologize to her and locks himself to her with handcuffs until she forgives him. Ryan is having visions about Taylor and ends up talking with Kirsten about it, and she tells him to embrace the good things that happen to him. He sees Taylor and she apologizes for kissing him, but he ends up inviting her on a date. However, during the date, he tells her that he's not ready to date yet. The next day, he goes to apologize to Taylor and finds her with this other guy named Roger, and she, of course, makes him believe that they are dating. Caitlin has some storyline about not being invited to the popular girls' party, so she ends up throwing her own party and everybody shows up, this, of course, without permission. Ryan and Seth also show up to the party to talk to their girls. Ryan finds out that Roger is gay and that Taylor was paying him to pretend that he liked her in order to make him jealous. Seth and Summer forgive Che. Ryan tells Taylor that he's not ready for a relationship, and she tells him that neither is she, and that they should just go with the flow. On the adult side, Bullet is trying to get Julie to date him, but she keeps rejecting him, and tells him that until they have a new batch of men signed up for the site, she will not go out with him. So Spencer shows up with a bunch of guys to sign up. Bullet asks her for a date again, but she says that she's going to a recommitment ceremony with Sandy and Kirsten. Bullet shows up, makes everybody uncomfortable, she blows up at him, and he apologizes. At the end of the night, Spencer calls her and in so many words tells her that the guys she signed up are getting paid by the woman they are sleeping with, which is illegal. It's Chrismukkah for the last time, and Ryan talks with Kirsten, who tells him that he should invite Taylor, but he receives a letter that had been sent to him by Marissa right when Taylor shows up to give him his gift. So he, of course, acts very weird with her, so she gets mad and argues with him while they're on a ladder, of which they both end up falling off of. When they woke up, they realize that they are in an alternative reality. In this reality, the Coenses never took Ryan in. Kirsten is in charge of the Newport group. Sandy is a politician. Sandy and Kirsten got a divorce and she married Jimmy while he married Julie. Seth goes to Brown, and since Ryan never existed, he's still a loser getting bullied by Luke's brothers. He and Summer never dated, and she is instead engaged to Che, who is cheating on her with Julie. Taylor originally thinks that they have to get everyone with their real partners in order to get back into the real reality, but that doesn't work, and she then realizes that they actually have to confront their biggest fear or problem. For her, it's finally confronting her mother, and for him, it's getting over Marissa's death. There is a part on the episode when they make it seem like she's alive and in Berkeley, but it turns out that it's actually Caitlin who's taking advanced classes there, and she tells him that Marissa died in Tijuana. In the real world, Taylor and Ryan are in a coma. She wakes up after confronting her mother in the parallel universe and is able to talk to her in the real world before her mom leaves for her holiday vacation, while Ryan wakes up after reading Marissa's letter in the alternative universe and finally saying goodbye. It's now New Year's Eve, and Ryan wants to surprise Taylor with a trip to Vegas, but Seth does not have any plans and Summer gets mad at him for it, so he ends up hijacking Ryan's trip and going with them. Taylor finds out that Summer is late on her period, so she convinces her to get a pregnancy test, but Summer doesn't want to do it. She packs the test in a brown bag and tells everybody that it's toothpaste, but Seth ends up seeing the pregnancy test, so Taylor tells him that it's hers because Summer doesn't want to tell him yet. On their way there, Taylor and Summer go to pee, and Summer gets the test done, but before they can see the results, this random girl dressed like an alien steals her bag, so they end up having to follow her to this alien party and trying to find her. While the girls are peeing, Seth tells Ryan about the pregnancy test because he thinks that Taylor is the one who's pregnant, so later on, Ryan tells Taylor that it's okay if she has sex with other people. She obviously gets mad about that and ends up running off. At the party, Seth tells Summer that they should celebrate the fact that it isn't her test, but obviously it is, so she ends up running off. She then comes across Ryan and Taylor and tells him that it's her test, but since they are both mad at the guys, they end up leaving without them. In the meantime, Ryan and Seth manage to steal the bag back and run away before getting caught. When they get back, before seeing the test, Seth proposes to Summer. She says yes, but it turns out that she's not pregnant, so they start to freak out. On the adult side, Julie is still running a prostitution service with Spencer without Kristen or Bullet knowing. This guy named Frank, who met Bullet in jail, shows up and asks him for a job, so he hired him as the bookkeeper for the company. He finds out about what's going on but doesn't tell anyone. That night, Bullet has a party and Kirsten realizes that all of the women there are with the man that Julie has been using and not the ones that they were actually set up with through their dating site. But she doesn't find out about the truth just yet. Sandy sees Frank and thinks that he knows him from somewhere but doesn't know where. And at the end of the night, Frank and Julie meet up at a hotel and he tells her that he's Ryan's dad, at the same time that Sandy finds out about it when looking through his record. It's been some days since their engagement and neither Seth nor Summer actually want to get married. They meet up to end their engagement, but instead Instead, they tell Taylor and Ryan to be their best man and maid of honor, and after this, they start to try and push each other into ending the engagement. Summer tells him that they should get married in Vegas, but before they get there, Seth tells her that he wants to ask her dad for permission. On the adult side, Julie meets up with Kirsten and tells her about Frank, and Sandy meets up with Frank, who tells him that he wants to see Ryan. Sandy goes and tells Ryan about it, and he says that he doesn't want to see him just yet, so Sandy calls Frank and tells him that. But Frank then goes to talk to Kirsten and tells her that he has cancer, so he tells Sandy that they should tell Ryan. Still, Sandy doesn't believe him and tells her that he wants to look at Frank's medical record. Meanwhile, Kirsten sets up a meeting between Ryan and Frank, and he invites him for dinner the next night. While they're having dinner, Sandy gets a phone call from the doctor who tells him that Frank is perfectly healthy, so he ends up punching him, kicking him out of the house.
You don't want to hit me. Oh, yes, I do.
Frank tells Ryan the truth and then leaves, not before kissing Julie. A few days later, Taylor and Ryan are hanging out together before Valentine's Day when she realizes that there is a new book called A Season for Peaches that her ex-husband wrote about their relationship. So she goes, tells Ryan about it, and asks him not to read it so he doesn't ruin their relationship. He agrees not to do so, but then ends up going to the library to buy one and comes across Taylor's ex who is there to sign books. Taylor ends up going to her ex's hotel room to talk to him, and he tells her that they should all go out together so that he can assure Ryan that he doesn't want to take her back. During the dinner, her ex tells her that he's going to do an interview on her favorite show and invites her on. Also, during that dinner, Ryan notices the connection between Taylor and her ex and starts to rethink their relationship. The next day, he apologizes and explains that he was insecure about the conversations that they were having, and she tells him that she will do the interview that night, and he decides to go to support her. But he ends up finding out that she lied about him and made him seem as more academically intellectual than he is. So of course he gets mad and ends up leaving, and she goes home with her ex. Seth is going to Seattle to talk to Neil, counting on the fact that he's going to say no, but when he gets there he actually says no. So Seth ends up telling him that he really does want to be with her, and Neil tells him to go ask him again when he finishes college. Summer starts to hang out with Holly and her friends, who all are married, and they're all very vapid and superficial and materialistic. So Summer starts to have visions of Shay because the way that she is behaving is obviously going against the new activism Summer, so she ends up sending everybody home. When Seth gets back home, he tells her that they should remain engaged but wait to get married, and she tells him that she can't be with him until she finds out who she really is and breaks off the engagement. On the adult side, Julie and Spencer are still running a prostitution site without Kirsten knowing, but Kirsten is suspicious and ends up stealing her phone in order to find out what's going on. She confronts Julie and fires her. A few days later, the girls are worried about the fact that the guys haven't called them in a while. Summer goes to talk to Ryan and tells him that Taylor's ex is looking for a house in Newport, and when she meets up with her ex, he tells her that he loves her. That night, Ryan goes to visit Taylor, and Caitlin tells her that Taylor is staying with her ex in his hotel. He goes there, and her ex tells him that she's shopping for furniture because they are moving into their house in a few days. Later on, Ryan convinces Summer of inviting Taylor to go to her house that night so that he can tell her how he feels about her. But he struggles to do so, and she tells him that her ex is going to read her a poem the next day. So Ryan decides to write her a poem too and reads it in front of everybody at the library, and she later on tells him that she needs to find herself before they can be together. Seth goes to talk to Summer and finds Shay there, who tells him that he wants to help him deal with everything. That night, Summer plans a romantic night with Seth to make up for rejecting him, but he can't do it, so he goes and asks Shay for help. Shay takes him on a spiritual retreat in the hills for Seth to see his path on where he stands with Summer, and tells her to find her own path while they're away. During their trip, Seth finds out that his spiritual animal is an otter, and Summer decides to open a rescue foundation for otters. While Chase, the spiritual animal, is in love with an otter, so he now thinks that his soulmate is Seth. On the adult side, Julie is still trying to get Kirsten to forgive her, but she's refusing to do so. However, later on, Spencer calls Kirsten and tells her that one of the guys has chlamydia, and they obviously have to tell everybody he slept with. So she ends up calling Julie, and Julie convinces her to go to do it with her. But later on, they come across Spencer, and he tells Kirsten that Julie made him lie to her so that she would hang out with her again. A few days later, Taylor has been stalking Ryan at his work, so she decides to go to therapy to fix that. She decides to return all of the things that she has from him and decides not to have any contact with him for 1 week. He tries to tell her that they should work on it together, but she leaves. The next day, she ends up spending the entire day stalking him at the Groundhog Day celebrations and accepts that that's just who she is, and they get back together. Shay is still staying at Summers' house and tells her that he's planning on stealing some otters that are going to be used for the Groundhog's Day celebration, and he gets Seth and Summer to help him. Seth and he get arrested alongside this other girl who was planning on doing the same, and who turns out to be Shay's real soulmate. On the adult side, Caitlin wants Julie to be with Bullet, so she starts to send emails to him pretending to be her mom. Meanwhile, Julie is dating Frank in secret. So Caitlin starts to try and sabotage that relationship, so she calls Bullet and he tells her that he's going to propose to her. She helps him find the engagement ring and plan the proposal, but Julie turns him down and tells Caitlin to tell Bullet the truth. Kirsten is about to celebrate her 40th birthday. Sandy throws her a surprise birthday party. Julie tells Bullet that she wants to get to meet him and breaks up with Frank, and Kirsten tells the family that she's pregnant. A few days later, Taylor finds out an address in Ryan's room. She, of course, goes to see whose it is, and it turns out that it's Frank's. So she comes up with a plan to have them meet up and have dinner together that night. Summer and Seth come across a psychic who tells her that her future love is George, and Seth finds out that the poem about the Little Mermaid, which made him fall in love with her when he was 8, was actually Taylor's. So from that point on, they both start wondering if they're meant to be, but later on, it turns out that George is a climate change organization and they offer Summer a job. On the adult side, Kirsten is acting a bit weird because she's having memories of her breakup with Jimmy because she was pregnant, and later having an abortion and going to Berkeley where she ultimately met Sandy. She comes clean about everything to him and tells him that she's glad she met him because he's the love of her life. Julie decides to give Bullet a real chance because Caitlin really likes him. That night, the three of them come across Ryan, Taylor, and Frank at the restaurant, and the kids realize that there was something going on between Frank and Julie, so Taylor tries to convince Ryan to try and get them back together. But he tells her that she doesn't think that Julie deserves someone like Frank. Taylor tells her that, and later on, Julie goes to tell Ryan that she thinks his dad is a good guy, so he agrees to help Taylor to get them back together. In the end, Taylor and Ryan manage to drive Julie to Frank's Valentine surprise, which is a hot dog stand, and in that moment, Caitlin shows up and tells Julie that Bullet prepared her a surprise, so she ends up living with her. Caitlin understands that she can't keep on like this, lets her mom go, and Julie goes to see Frank. Days later, Taylor wants Ryan to tell her that he loves her and asks her to go to Berkeley with him because she's already applied and got accepted. She tries to push him into saying it, but he doesn't, so Summer tells her to be the one who says it first, and that night she makes dinner for them and tries to get him drunk to get him to say it, but instead she gets drunk, he says that he loves her, and she tells him about Berkeley.
Are you pretending to go to sleep thinking I'll tell you I love you while you're unconscious?
Maybe.
I love you.
Summer tells Seth that since she's now going to be busy, he should try to find something he's passionate about, so he decides to make a film. He films the pool for 6 hours, which obviously she doesn't like, so she tells him that he needs to actually try because she wants him to be excited about something. The next day, Taylor doesn't remember if Ryan said he loved her or not, and Ryan is rethinking whether or not he truly loves her. That night during her birthday party, Ryan is supposed to give her a book of poems that she had translated from French and that he had made into a book, but at the last minute he freaks out and gives her a dictionary, so she runs away crying. On the adult side, Julie and Frank are dating and he's spending a lot of time in their house, which obviously makes Caitlin mad, so she decides to sabotage their relationship by planting clown porn on his bag for Julie to find. Later that night, she puts on some flyers about it and tells Julie that they have lost too many people in the last 2 years and that she just wants the two of them to be a family without outside intervention. Kirsten has second thoughts about raising another baby in Newport after she meets Holly and the wife of one of Sandy's friends. She starts thinking that they should move, but she wants the boys to be able to go back to that house during the holidays, so she doesn't want to sell. At the end of the night, Julie tells Frank that they need some space, Seth decides that he wants to be a movie critic, Ryan apologizes to Taylor and gives her her real gift, and an earthquake happens. During the earthquake, a glass storage unit falls on Ryan and he gets a piece of glass stuck on his side, but he doesn't want to tell Taylor because she's scared of blood. So he calls Seth and gets him to go to Marissa's house without telling Summer anything so that they can go to the hospital without the girls knowing. When Seth gets there, he takes him to the hospital, but one of their tires ends up deflating, so they have to walk to the hospital, but obviously Ryan is very weak. So Seth makes a deal with a homeless man to trade their car for a shopping cart in order to get him to the hospital. At Summer's house, she and Taylor try to find Pancakes the rabbit. While looking for it, they think that there's an intruder in the house, so they shoot at it, but it turns out that it's Taylor's mom who was looking for her. On the adult side, Julie and Caitlin are stuck in an ice cream shop that is apparently separated from the rest, so they spend the entire night stuck there with an employee from the shop until Caitlin realizes that he lied in order to spend the night with them, and that they can actually go outside right when Frank shows up to save them. Kirsten and Sandy are in the shopping center, and when the aftershock hits, she ends up falling down the stairs and tells him that there is something wrong with the pregnancy. At the end, Summer and Taylor get her mom to the hospital, and she tells Taylor that she loves her. Caitlin apologizes to Frank, and they come across Ryan and Seth and take them to the hospital. Kirsten is told that the baby is fine, and when the Coenses go home, they realize that while the outside of the house is fine, the inside is completely destroyed. 6 months later, the Coenses are living with Julie and Caitlin. Taylor moved to France. Julie is pregnant with Frank's baby, but she's engaged to Bullet. The Jacobinses go to see the inspection of the house, and they are told that they cannot rebuild it because the cost of saving it is higher than the price of the house, so they go to see some houses around Newport. Taylor gets back from France to visit Summer, and after coming across Ryan and Seth, she realizes that she's still in love with him. The boys, on the other hand, are in the airport because they want to go to Berkeley and try to buy their old house back from the owners, but they tell them the house is not for sale and tell them to go. In Newport, Kirsten and Sandy put an offer for a house when Bullet shows up and tells them that the boys are waiting for them in Berkeley and that he will take them there. When they get there, the baby is born in the house. Caitlin meets all Bullet's sons, which are 12 boys, and they find out that Julie's baby is also a boy. Julie and Caitlin set up for the wedding, and she tells her the baby is Frank's and that when he finds out that she was pregnant, he couldn't take it and ran away. The day of the wedding, Bullet tells Julie that Kirsten won't show up, so she decides that they need to go to Berkeley because she won't get married without her, and they end up having the wedding at the Berkeley house. While the wedding is happening, Frank shows up to stop it, but of course they are not there, so he ends up calling Caitlin and telling Julie that he loves her. So she decides to break up with both him and Bullet and just be alone. Seth and Summer talk about their future, and they realize that they don't bring the best out of each other anymore, so Seth tells Summer that she needs to go with George while he goes to college. Taylor and Ryan say goodbye before she has to go back to France, and the owners of the house agree to sell it, so they move in. Time goes by, Seth and Ryan start school, Summer keeps working as an activist, Julie gets an undergrad degree and gives birth, Cindy becomes a teacher at Berkeley, Summer and Seth get married, and Ryan becomes an architect. The season ends with Ryan seeing this kid that looks a lot like he did in the first episode and asking him if he needs help. It's finally the end of the show, and I am so bored. Season 4 is boring. It doesn't really have much resemblance to the previous 3, and it's actually more like a sitcom without the laugh track instead of a teen drama. The season is still better than season 3, it's much lighter like I wanted it to be, and it has its very funny moments, mainly thanks to Taylor and surprisingly Ryan, but the season overall is quite boring. I really like the first 3 episodes. I think they did a good job at addressing the fallout of Marissa's death, and I also think that the time jump was good because I doubt they would have been able to properly continue the story without putting a lot of distance between Marissa's death and the time where the show is taking place. Let's get into the things that I didn't like. I didn't like Frank. I really hate that he was the one who gets to have a happy ending and a relationship with Ryan when Dawn is right there. She's the one who deserves happiness and peace with her son, not the man who put them through hell. And yes, I know people can change, but he literally lied about having cancer to emotionally manipulate Ryan into talking to him. Julie still sucks. I understand that she was mourning Marissa, but the way she ignored Caitlin was really fucked up, and the fact that she didn't notice or didn't care about how her behavior was hurting her until she spelled it out for her is given bad mom. Also, as established, I hated Frank, and thus I hate the relationship between these two. Caitlin's storylines at school were boring and unnecessary. I do not care about whatever is going on at Harvard now that the main characters are out of the school. Maybe if Luke's twin brothers had become actual characters who are her friends instead of just her minions who say 1 or 2 lines at the time, maybe their storyline would have been interesting, but that didn't happen, so... Kirsten and Sandy felt like they were barely there. The only Sandy-focused storyline that I remember is when he tried to make friends who appear in only 2 episodes, and that's it. And the Kirsten storyline, besides the pregnancy that I remember, is the whole thing with Julie and the prostitutes, which was more about Julie than about her. In one hand, this is good because I get less opportunities to dislike Sandy. I actually thought that he was pretty good during the entire season and more reminiscent of season 1 Sandy. But on the other hand, the adult storylines were one of my favorite parts of the show in season 1 and 2, especially when they would be tied to the kids' storyline. Summer probably became the most interesting storyline in the season, seeing her use activism as a way to cope, but then realizing that she actually does care about those things, and that doesn't mean that she can also care about other things like beauty and fashion was really nice. Seth, on the other hand, was like a ghost. All he did was chase her around, and that's it, which is not that different from the previous seasons, but it was nice when in season 2 he was passionate about the comic, or in season 3 when he really wanted to get into Brown. So seeing him do nothing this season was boring. Che was an annoying character who overstayed his welcome. Ryan and Taylor were my favorite part of the season. She was adorable. I understand why some people might think that she's annoying, but I think that the actress was very charismatic and was able to just make her cute. As for Ryan, it was nice to see him being happy and relaxed. Even when he had drama with Taylor, that was not even 1% as dramatic as the most boring drama with Marissa. It felt like he was living a semi-normal relationship with a girl for the first time, and it was nice to see him joking around and just enjoying his life. Overall, the season is better than the previous one. It's pretty enjoyable. The tone is super different, but I actually wanted that because the previous season was too much. It was a fine ending with them moving to Berkeley and stuff. I wish that they had been clear about where Ryan and Taylor stand, so they could be like Kirsten and Sandy for the kid he sees in the end. But in my canon, they are together, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah, overall, it was okay. It was an okay season with an okay ending. If you had told me that the OC would end like this after seeing season 1 and 2, I would have laughed at you. But it is what it is. That was all for today's video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!